Welcome to our session today and tonight, depending on where you are in the world. We are going to have a discussion with three strategy mavericks who are all challenging the world of strategy in different ways. Let me start by introducing myself. So I'm Lisa Carlin. I'm based in Sydney, and I'm Director of Future Builders and also author of the newsletter Turbocharge Weekly. So I'm a strategy execution specialist, and I believe traditional strategy development gets staff offside before you've even begun, which makes implementation harder. And I look forward to discussing this and more. I'm your chair for today, and I'm pleased to introduce to you three panelists. Firstly, Will Bachman from New York, founder of Mavericks, a global community of over 5,000 independent management consultants. And he's author of the Chief Strategy Officer Handbook. Hi, Will.
Hello, good to meet everybody.
We also have Alex M.H. Smith, based in London. Alex is a breakthrough strategist and author of No Bullshit Strategy. He has almost 80,000 followers on LinkedIn who love his work. Hi, Alex.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Then I'm delighted to have Rob McLean, AM from Sydney. Rob's an author, investor, and philanthropist. So Rob led the Australia-New Zealand practice of McKinsey. He's a former dean of the Australian Graduate School of Management, and he's been awarded an honorary doctorate of business from UNSW. Hi, Rob.
Hi there, Lisa.
I'd also like to thank Claire Braund. I'm not sure if Claire's online yet. Claire is CEO of Women on Boards, who's sponsoring our panel today. And in our Australian tradition, I acknowledge the original custodians of this land, the Gadigal people, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I encourage you all to keep your cameras on and to keep yourself on mute and add your comments via the chat. Please hold your questions until the last 15 minutes. So just to provide some context, over the years, I've seen many strategies not implemented. Some are just fluff with no real choice. Some are more analysis than strategy, and some are brilliant strategies but can't be executed due to apathy or strong resistance. Over recent times, we've had additional challenges to strategies and their shelf life with volatility, uncertain business environment, and then there's obviously the significant digital and AI disruption. So we thought tonight we'll start with the problem of strategy. And while our panel is answering this first question, I'm going to invite everyone in the audience to insert your number one problem with strategy in the chat, so we can have a look at that. So let's start with Rob. Rob, you've spent a great deal of your working life leading McKinsey teams, working on client strategies and then running the firm's office in Australia and New Zealand. You've co-authored 2 books on strategy with Charles Conn, the latest being The Imperfectionists, Strategic Mindsets for Uncertain Times, and you can wave it in the air for us. What do you think is not working with the way strategy is traditionally developed?
I think the thing that comes to mind is that the strategy that I worked on for many, many years was deterministic and assumed certainty, but increasingly we have an uncertain world. And one of the sort of great surprises is I've never seen a business plan and strategy that actually had risk and probability attached to it. There's assumptions about certainty that deep down we just know aren't true and don't hold. And the second part of this is that we've got very fast change, and the cadence of strategy is changing as well. And yet we see so many enterprises locked into 3- and 5-year plans as their modus operandi. So there's a lot of the old architecture and way of going about things that we've set out to challenge, particularly in our most recent book.
Thank you. And Alex, your book, No BS Strategy, is a frank and honest expose. You say most strategy is, let's face it, bullshit. A fancy I'm quoting you, a bunch of fancy words which mean nothing at all. Tell us what you mean there. What's wrong with strategy?
Well, I think that the first thing to point out is that once you get to a certain high echelon of business and the sort of things that, well, for example, Rob and Will have been working on, whatever, I don't see any real problems up there. Like, I think that businesses above a certain size do tend to understand strategy and have the resources to do it properly, et cetera, et cetera. But once you get under a certain size, and we're not talking like sort of mum and pop businesses, we're talking like, I would say, let's say 500 million and below. It's not so much that they're bad at it as that they don't do it at all. The lack of understanding of the field is absolutely shocking. And obviously this leads to all those sort of BS strategies are sort of existing in that realm, where essentially, people are just doing strategies which aren't actually strategies, let alone being simply bad strategies. And so I suppose that because I've sort of like come at the industry from the bottom up, so I haven't sort of worked at the top of the industry. I've only sort of worked at the bottom of the industry. And so I've sort of been seeing things from that perspective. And basically the thrust of my work is thinking about, okay, well, how can we make these precepts accessible and engaging and interesting and usable for your sort of medium-sized businesses? Because that is where the true vacuum, in my estimation, lies. And you don't actually. And so a lot of, I get, being super frank about it, a lot of what I do in my book and my posts and stuff, you could argue that it's kind of in some sense dumbed down strategy, but that's kind of the point, because it doesn't need to be right so much as it needs to be something which is more right than what they're currently doing, and that will actually get people to start engaging and taking action. So that's the kind of focus, I suppose, of my work. But certainly, yes, I definitely wouldn't want it to be seen to me to say that traditional strategy is bullshit. It most certainly is not. It's just, it has limited purchase as you drop down the scales of business.
Right. So that's interesting. So I'm hearing, a lot of emphasis there, Alex, on the need to take action. And I think that's echoed in some of the comments that I'm seeing on in the chat. I particularly like Janie Jordan's comment, "Culture is everything," which has certainly been my experience. Let's move on to some new approaches. And Will, let's turn to you. Now, you've got one of the largest global networks of independent consultants, and most of them are from McKinsey and BCG and Bain. So, and then you match them with executives who want high quality strategy and project work. So you see a lot of these projects coming past your desk. I saw 13 in the last week's email, and you email all these these opportunities every week. What do you see as the main trends in what executives are looking for in their strategy process?
Well, thanks, Lisa. And before I answer, I'll also put out a request for all the people attending today. It's before you drop off at the end of today's session, it would be so helpful if you could pop in the chat just one thing that you took away from today, either one thing you found surprising or helpful or that you'll do on Monday. It's always interesting to presenters to know like what resonated. I'm sure Lisa would also love to know, like, sometimes it could be an offhand comment. So if you could just sort of keep that in mind through the conversation today and be prepared at the end to pop something in the chat. I guess what my answer to your question, Lisa, is unfortunately quite boring. So I have about 10 conversations a week with clients who are looking for an independent consultant. So I have the benefit of 500 conversations per year with clients who are looking for a consultant. And the frank answer is it's actually, and I've been doing this for 15 years. So it actually has not changed that much. What people are looking for is, and I hear almost the same thing every single conversation. We're looking for someone who can roll up their sleeves. We're looking for someone who can convert conversations into action, right? So it's not so much today that there's something dramatically new in the world. People are looking for someone who can, not just, engage in good conversation or come up with good ideas, but very much clients are looking for someone who can sit in a meeting and then, immediately afterward, turn that into documentation, turn that into deliverables, and then turn those deliverables into actual change in their organization. And one thing that people can do is just practice, after meetings, like just sending out meeting recap with not just notes, but okay, here's clear action items, who's going to do what. Second, slightly different thing, as I'd say, is everyone should be a little bit sensitive to the idea that strategy consultants, think about the incentives. Strategy consultants have an incentive to complexify strategy, right? If strategy is super simple and straightforward to do, then anyone can do it. So people who are making a living selling strategy work want to say, no, we have the latest, greatest approach. And ours is, we need dynamic, changing, strategy, the cutting edge. Whereas just doing the basic block and tackling, if you can ask all 10 senior executives independently to write down, what is your company strategy? What is your definition of winning? Where do you play? How do you win? If they all could write that down and have the same answer, you would be ahead of the majority of firms, right? Just having alignment and clarity on what your strategy is. So thank you, Lisa. Back to you.
Right, alignment and clarity. Okay, so starting to see some themes emerging: alignment, clarity, and action, which is echoing what Alex was saying. Alex, tell us what strategists need to do to avoid this BS term that you talk about. Any new approaches that you use, or any ideas that you can share to avoid that BS badge?
Yeah, I mean, without obviously getting into the weeds about sort of what is and isn't strategy and all that, which we can do, but that's a whole sort of conversation in itself. There's an obvious point and there's a less obvious point. The obvious point is that, like I say, a strategy needs to be a strategy. It needs to have substance, and it needs to, as Will said, basically convert to an act as opposed to an aspiration. I mean, like, it's sort of like if you want to lose weight, that's an aspiration, and it's a bit unclear on what you do. But if you say, all right, stop eating sugar for sake of argument, that's an act, and it's like, it may or may not be a good strategy for losing weight, but at least it's a thing that you can do. So then there's something that you can actually hold on to, and people can say, oh yeah, I'll just do that, and off you go. So it's that kind of like shift is the first thing in terms of actually getting people to, if you want people to do something, you have to tell them what to do. I know it sounds like so stupid, but that's basically actually like the thing that is so often missing. Like, you want people to do something, but you don't tell them what to do, right? So that's kind of like the first hurdle. And then the second hurdle, which I think is a bit more unusual, I think that there is a massive, massive underemphasis on style in strategy. The style of presentation, the charisma of ideas, the storytelling, all of that kind of stuff. We understand, well, we said, in principle, most businesses understand that when you're talking to a consumer, you need to speak to them in a sort of like a compelling way. You can't just say, buy this product because it makes sense for XYZ reasons. But when we're doing internal comms, we lose all of that. And I think that actually we really need to treat the teams inside with the same level of sort of care and stylistic attention as we treat external consumers. I think we probably overestimate people's ability to grasp abstractions, people's interest in strategy. I think that 80% of people just quite simply couldn't care less. Their brain doesn't work that way. They're sort of geared in different directions. And so even if you have this fabulous strategy and you lay it out to people, boom, 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 here's what we're going to do. For a lot of people, that sort of goes in one ear and out the other. And so I think that things get lost there. But if you actually focus a bit more on, for want of a better term, sort of sexing up the strategy, then you can make an awful lot more progress. And yeah, I suppose that, like, because there's this huge emphasis from strategists, I would say, on making strategy right, but there's almost no emphasis on making strategy interesting. But if you conceive of strategy as being a motivational discipline, which when you think about it logically, it is, because you don't just have to figure out what to do, but you have to motivate people to do it. If you see your role as being a little bit like a sort of Tony Robbins type role within the thing, where it's fine, you tell people what to do, but you've actually got to light a fire under them, otherwise they're never going to do it. I think that changes the complexion of the project quite a lot. And then you start to see more clearly why a lot of good strategies fall away, because no effort at all has been placed on making people engage with the idea.
Interesting. And Alex, you're very much known for your, you've got close to 80,000 fans I will call them fans on LinkedIn, who clearly love you. And, for the way you have taken strategy and made it so simple to understand and made it feel like it's in everybody's reach, which is why I so much wanted you to be part of this conversation. So Rob, ex-McKinsey, Will comes from McKinsey. I spent some in my early career was at McKinsey. And so we have a particular, you have a particular lens around how you taught strategy, if you like. And I think one of the exciting things you've done is really make it quite easy to understand. And I can almost see that term that you've just mentioned popping up all over LinkedIn, sex up the strategy to make more progress, I've written down here. So there you go.
Actually, I should use that actually.
Rob, any comments on that? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the approach that you've got in your book, and particularly addresses the uncertainty aspects in the book, The Imperfectionists. And you've also, folks who read Harvard Business Review would have seen Rob authored in there as well. What's different going forward?
Well, maybe if I start with what's unchanged, and that is that I've always viewed strategy as problem solving. Well, you've got to define a problem, or as we say in The Imperfectionists, an audacious question, and then you bring different lenses to bear. You often seek to anchor outside the company or the industry that you're in, given that we know that with so much disruption, it's going to come from outside your industry. But what's new to me is that there's a much greater premium on new data, on trials and experiments. And the way our teams were set up in McKinsey to do that kind of work with clients really wasn't ideal, and I'm sure probably isn't ideal today, because experiments and trials and these kind of things all take periods of time, and it probably doesn't fit neatly into the blocks that Will was talking about earlier, that assignments take. So the new strategy to us is a lot more of peeling back these layers of uncertainty, putting people in the position where they can take decisions, evolve a strategy. And so, for example, in The Imperfectionists, we talk about how Amazon has built itself into a 20% consumer share in consumer payments, through a series of moves, some that failed, others that they built on, and you don't immediately see it as strategy. It's only when you see it depicted over a 10-year period you go, oh my goodness, that's what they were doing. And that is a really robust strategy. They were learning as they were going. They were taking bite-sized pieces. They were taking steps backwards when they failed. And so this to me, is in the continued sense of a strategy being about problem solving, but we're adding these dimensions of how you deal with uncertainty, where the next step forward isn't particularly clear. Just one final comment, and Alex has touched on this in some of his writing. I continue to see so many presentations where strategic intent is confused with strategy. Strategic intent isn't strategy. Strategy is that integrated set of actions that take you forward and build value and competitive advantage. But so many of the organizations that I see seem to be happy just to leave it as a presentation about strategic intent.
Which is often where, over the years I've come in, and then it's not a strategy, and it's really difficult to go straight into action because there's another whole chunk of work that needs to be done to make it more specific. But I'm interested, Rob, in what you said about peeling back uncertainty. So what is it sort of that we need to do to deal with the fact that we can't have, these 3 to 5 year plans, in concrete?
Yeah, I've got a software company that I'm invested in, which has an AI data platform. And, I've been pushing them around whether their plans, that they're certainly not interested in 5-year plans. They're not much interested in 3-year or 1-year plans, but they've evolved what they call continuous development. And it's this notion of we're learning every day from partners and customers, about the kind of offering that they want to have. And it seems to me that sort of way of thinking is much more in line with the way the world is now, where you break things down into chunks that you can have clarity over the next 60 or 90 days, but you may not have much clarity about what you want to be doing in 2 years' time.
Interesting. Any other panel want to come in on that one? So,
oh, sorry, go on.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just. Did I talk over you, Will?
Tell us a little bit more, Rob, because I guess
you go ahead, Will.
I guess I'm a little bit confused now. So you're saying that, having the high level strategic intent for kind of the big view, of who we are and where we want to win, but then doing that continuous development within. I mean, there must be that's the framework, right? There's got to be some kind of framework to operate within with all this continuous development. Otherwise, it's just open slather with no real umbrella to it all.
Well, but it's interesting. I was listening to the head of OpenAI the other day, and he was just using words like, we're just taking one step at a time. We don't feel that we can see more than 2 years out, and so we're focused on what we have visibility on. And that you can say that's quite operational, but in his world and in the world that I'm in with a lot of VC and private equity, they are strategic moves that are being made, each 60, 90 days that will form the future of 3 to 5 years. But it's this analogy we often use, that strategy looks more like rugby, where you're moving the ball forward. Sometimes the ball going backwards. Sometimes you've got to take steps backwards. So it is this at the end of the day, it's this integrated set of actions, but it looks messy. It doesn't look tidy. It doesn't look very top down or strategic when it's happening, but in fact it is.
To me, this is one of the, I'm not entirely sure I'm on solid ground here, but I'll chuck it out there anyway. I think this is one of the things that gives, again, those sort of medium-sized businesses a huge challenge, and that makes the strategy literature very difficult to work with, because I think that a lot of this is quite different with an extremely big business like Amazon versus a more sort of singular kind of unipolar business, if you want to call it that, like a single product or single brand, whereby I think that, to your point, Lisa, if you are a kind of, let's just say for sake of argument, a cereal brand in the supermarket, and that's the whole business, is just like that brand and that box of cereal or that range of cereals, then you do probably have a kind of a single point of strategic focus, which organizes your actions in quite a coherent way, because ultimately all the actions need to be sort of building on and coherent with the brand that you're kind of creating out there and the way that it relates to the category, etc., etc. With a business like OpenAI or Amazon that have got so many more parts and also so much more power, I think that you don't end up having that same level of sort of elegant simplicity, exactly as sort of Rob says. So I think that when you consider that so much of the strategy literature out there has been kind of constructed in order to be relevant to businesses like Amazon, which means that it has to be much sort of broader and more sophisticated, that's the kind of thing that I think that makes it sort of inaccessible for a single brand founder or CEO to get their head around. I mean, this is something that I found with, obviously I've read like a few of the great strategy books and stuff, and the scale of businesses that they're often talking about is all the like sort of General Electric and pig iron mines in Peru and all of this sort of stuff, which is actually it's very hard to connect those concerns with I'm running a $50 million shoe brand or something like that. So it's that gap there is in and of itself quite a big communication problem. I don't know. I don't know if you guys think that's right. I'm not. I was just sort of making that up a bit.
It does seem to sort of depend on the business, and we've got, the business that you're in, and I think, Rob, you've had quoted some tech firms. Alina Dale was also asking that question, depends on the type of business you're in, right?
Yeah. I would add something, Lisa, and take it in a slightly different direction in terms of what is different. And, Rob mentioned OpenAI. I wanted just to build on that for a minute. I think we should think about what sorts of skills for us as consultants or strategists are going to rise in status and what relatively lowers in status with the appearance of these tools. And I'd say that industry knowledge lowers in status. Functional knowledge lowers in status. It's a great equalizer, right? It used to be when I was at McKinsey, you would turn to the firm expert and try to get time on that person's calendar to explain to you how some industry works. So now any one of us can, let's say that we have a project opportunity, energy industry, right? Energy storage industry. We know nothing about it. You could do a prompt to say to ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using, please take on the role of a senior partner at McKinsey in the energy practice. You've been asked by a private equity firm to provide an in-depth presentation on everything you know about the energy storage industry. As a first step, please share the outline of your presentation, right? And then you get the outline. And it's great. Now for the first point, please provide an in-depth script of what you would be telling the private equity firm on topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, right? And now you've just given yourself a 100-page report on the energy storage industry. You could do the same thing on some functional thing, like how does post-merger integration work for an energy storage company or for a cereal company, to Alex's point. What rises in status is those interstitial skills, right? What Alex is talking about how to communicate and motivate people, how to sell, right? How to actually build alignment around people. So if you have that skill of really how to use these Gen AI tools, I think that's going to be essential to any consultant. And it's not something you can just learn in an hour or two. It's something that I think takes dozens, over 100 hours of just practice and using these tools, testing out different prompts. There's not like one way to do it. It's sort of learning how to play a musical instrument. So maybe as we continue discussion, I'd be curious for people to pop in the chat, what tool have been using and how have you been using it in your practice? A lot of people signed up right away and just played around with OpenAI and said, "Oh, write me a Taylor Swift, lyrics on some topic," but then they kind of dropped it. I'd be curious to see how people are using it in their practice. So back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Will. And it's definitely really interesting to see how AI is changing strategy. So I follow Lenny's newsletter and Lenny's podcast, which is one of the top 10 technology podcasts, and his community is amazing. It's 15,000 of us and paid community. And when Lenny's been asked around strategy and how AI is going to impact it, when Lenny's asked around product managers, right, which is the function that he focuses on mainly, and how AI is going to impact it. He says the number one difference is going to be, the number one impact is going to be strategy. So what I want to do before I move on to my next question is give you a 30-second advertising break and let you know that if you want any more information on strategy execution that builds stakeholder support and not resistance, that is what I'm focused on. And I've got a 2-day boot camp coming up in October. And I'm going to pop the link in the chat now. If anyone's interested, you can register your interest and I'll send you an outline. So that's what's in there. Now, let's move on to that people impact and dive in a bit more, because I see a lot of people getting worried when the CEO starts a new strategy project or the consultants come in to do some strategy work. That traditional work has been done in what I call the dark room. So this is where the consultants sit separately or the executives huddle in boardrooms and work out what the strategy is. And then they come out, and only once it's gone through approvals and the board's approved it, is it then communicated to staff. So I'd love to know what your thoughts on that are. Who'd like to start us off? Rob, Alex, Will?
Well, I'll just be a bit provocative and difficult to say that. I mean, I don't really know, but I kind of like the dark room approach. The reason that I say that, I mean, I certainly don't think it's good politically, and all the problems that you can list with it are definitely true. But my feeling is that if a business is going to make some sort of like radical, meaningful move, that obviously isn't going to be designed by committee. Obviously, you can give people a feeling of involvement. You can talk to people, make it feel like they've had their voice heard. But ultimately, there's basically, let's face it, there's going to be one person saying, I think we should do X, if that's going to be something exciting. And that person basically has to own it and push it. And so you sort of can't really get away from a slightly autocratic approach. I don't think it's a surprise that, like, not to say that they are like the perfect behavioral role models, but like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk were both two of the greatest business strategic leaders of all time, also complete tyrants in their businesses. I don't actually think that's like a coincidence. I think that it's a sort of, that's not a bug, that's a feature. But there's obviously they're special cases, but I do think there's something to learn there. I think that, but even with that, because a single individual basically has to take responsibility for a really interesting, exciting strategic move, that I think is unavoidable. But obviously, the way that you then disseminate that and make people feel involved, you can make people feel warm to it and involved in it, even if in truth they really didn't have anything to do with it. So it's a bit like a politician, right? Like a great politician makes their supporters feel like they are somehow intimately involved in their cause, when actually, if you really look at it coldly, they're just the recipients of that message rather than the originators of that message. So that would be my sense, but I could definitely be persuaded otherwise.
Well, I definitely took exception when I saw the other day you put online something like rule like a dictator. But I think the answer is
that's out of context, but it's sort of true.
Well, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, because I also have an article called "Strategy is Not Democratic," so I wouldn't advocate that.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Rob, what's your view?
Look, I think the work of strategy is bifurcating quite a bit. And the kind of thing, I've got an example in the book of a McKinsey team were looking at new product areas, and they did something like 5,000 expert calls in a minute using AI. And they trolled around to find out where the patents were and who developed them, to give them insight as to, what areas that they wanted to push behind. So there's actually a whole new realm of dark room activity emerging via AI. But I would say on the other side, what I felt McKinsey teams did especially well was talking to the customer, and Will uses this expression as well, bringing voice of the customer perspectives and insight about new segments and different ways of competing. And if you add to it what I've been talking about of running these trials and experiments to get new data and insight, that forces you to be working very, very closely to the front with the front line.
Will?
I'll share a story. So I was a naval officer before I went to McKinsey. When I was a young ensign, I was a submarine officer. I was particularly impressed by one of the junior officers on board. He was a lieutenant who'd been on board for 4 or 5 years, or 3 years. And he could run the entire boat on, in port as the duty officer from the wardroom, right? People would come to him for permission to do work. He'd sign their tag-outs, give them permission. He could run the whole day from the wardroom. And I was so impressed with that. I was telling the engineer officer, who was, our boss, a department head, it's so impressive. Jeff knows the boat so well. He knows what's going on. And the engineer said, Jeff is the laziest, worst junior officer on board. He should not be a role model. What I want you to do is go put your eyeballs on the job site, right? Get back in there in the engine room, get down in the bilge, look at what they're working on, put your eyeballs on the job site. So I think that is what consultants and strategists need to do. So we do need to get the insights of the people at the front lines, right? You can't do that from the boardroom. You can't do that from the team room at the corporate headquarters. You need to go out there and get the insights from the people who are touching the customers, from the people, at the production floor. But I don't think those people necessarily have the view to decide where the company should go next, right? My captain did not ask, engine room lower level watch, where we should steer the ship, but we still want to get the insights at the front line.
I feel like the shape, actually, the way that you put it, I mean, I guess like the straightforward way of thinking about it is that it's a sort of hourglass shaped process, if you can picture that, where you've got to begin by gathering information from everybody and then they feel involved. But exactly as Will said, let's be real, they're not about to drop some sort of strategy bomb on you. They're just going to give you relevant evidence to chew over. Then you basically go away onto your proverbial yacht and sort of think about it and look at the angles and actually have the core idea, let's say. And then after that, you can bring it back to the people and you can say, all right, well, in the macro, this is what we're going to do. And then you can hand responsibility back to them by saying, in your particular role, in your particular department, what do you think this would look like? So they have some sort of executional ideation power, if not sort of strategic power. So that feels like a sort of commonsensical way to do it, I guess.
That's beautifully put, Alex. I call it the negotiables and the non-negotiables, and that's why things are not democratic. Okay, I'm just looking at the time and I want to allow some time for questions. So I'm going to ask you each let's look at some practical advice. Okay, so you've had lots of learnings across all of this. If you could summarize it for us into 1 or 2 key things, let's make it one recommendation you'd make to those here that are interested in strategy, developing strategy. What must they get right? Rob?
Well, I come back to the fact of it really has to be a problem-solving activity that explicitly recognizes uncertainty, and where you have an approach where you tolerate ambiguity, you take steps forward, feeling the stones beneath your feet. And this is not, yes, it's Amazon and yes, it's SpaceX, but it's also quite small companies that I'm seeing in, software and education and things like that. And that, to me, is this new world of strategy that we don't talk enough about, but it's the reality.
Thank you. Alex?
I quite like the challenge to boil it down to one thing. So I guess that one thing I think would be, it sounds too obvious to say, and yet at the end of the day, this is what constantly doesn't happen, is if you want your results to change, then you have to change something. I mean, at this most brutal and basic level, just change something. I mean, and whether it's even strategically good is actually very, very secondary, because the issue that most people have is that they actually don't really change anything. They play act at changing things whilst nothing meaningful ever changes. And then they're like, I don't understand why our results aren't improving when literally nothing meaningful has changed over the course of that so-called strategy process. So even if you're like the most unstrategic thinker on the entire planet, at the very least, if you just change something in the business from X to Y, then different things will happen. And maybe they'll be better, maybe they'll be worse, but it's the only way that you can actually really expect some form of movement. So yeah, crazy that it needs to be said, but it does need to be said.
Great. And I invite everybody to put their questions in the chat, because we've got some time for questions. Let me turn to Will last to answer that question on one thing people have to do, please.
I'd say it's a cousin of what Alex said, which is really implementation. So like from my viewpoint, in terms of the client conversations that we're having, what they're looking for, the number of requests that we get for actual strategy development is down, but the number of requests that we get for a consultant to help with strategy implementation or strategic execution or transformation office is way up. So I think that, companies are realizing that they need to put, even more resources into actually implementation, transformation office, strategy execution to actually make the change happen.
Thank you, Will. So I'm just looking through, we've got some time for questions, and I'm looking through those. Before I go to the question, I wouldn't mind going through a comment here. So Mark Dippel, who is from the Netherlands, he's saying, execute like a dictator. When strategy creation becomes the work of a dictator, things go wrong. What do we think about that? Anyone want to comment on the panel?
Well, given that I was the dictator advocate, I mean, the subtlety there is execute like a dictator. That would definitely be bad. That would definitely be bad. I would say sort of think or lead like a dictator, maybe. I mean, there's probably a more positive word than dictator that ultimately boils down to the same thing. But yes, I guess it comes back to that hourglass thing that like people need to be empowered to execute in their own way, provided that, of course, it's that it's aligned with strategy. Again, like it's a trite example, but like Johnny Ive at Apple was empowered by Steve Jobs to do what he did best, but within the guardrails that Jobs had laid down to him. So like to me, that is a good balance.
Right. So we've got a question here. How do you feel, from Elena Dale? How do you help people feel comfortable with uncertainty? Who'd like to take that one?
I'll have a go at that. And I think this is really quite an important role for senior management and team leaders, which is to say it's okay to say we don't know enough now to make a really big move forward, or we may have to wait, or we need a strategy for laying off risk in order to move forward. But I think if you don't do that, we're kidding ourselves about the real risks that we're taking. And as we saw in COVID, a lot of companies just put things on ice, and then other companies made faster progress going ahead because they were better able to handle uncertainty and the ambiguity that we felt during that period. So it does go back to this comment I made earlier of, have you ever seen a business plan with probabilities attached to it? No. Why would that be the case? Because we just feel more comfortable pretending that the world is certain when it isn't.
I love it when I see news headlines that say something like, we're living in unprecedented times, because you never see one that says we are living in precedented times, right? I made a t-shirt for myself. I have this thing where I make t-shirts and put little sayings on that I want to remember. One t-shirt that I made for myself, it says, everything important is uncertain. So I don't think we necessarily need to get people comfortable with uncertainty. We just need people to say, look, uncertainty is a fact of life and we got to live with it. You don't have to be comfortable with it, but it is just a thing, right? Deal with it.
Will, I want to see you with a picture of you in that t-shirt on LinkedIn next week. Okay, there's your challenge. I love that. Everything important is uncertain. Okay, let's go to another question that we've got here. This is from Hani Dianza. After we create strategy development and do implementation, how, if the results are not all good, what's your best suggestion to doing monitoring, evaluation, improvement? So monitoring, evaluation, improvement, how do we do that? That sort of monitoring and fine tuning during implementation. Any suggestions?
I'd love to hear Rob weigh in on that.
Oh, look, that was, of course, the stuff of so much of what we did at McKinsey, and you never feel that it's being done, as well as you'd like it to be. And there was always a huge dilemma in that, the cost is very high, to keep McKinsey people around, right through implementation. But on the other hand, the risks go up, when you leave earlier than you would like to. I'm sure Will deals with that every day of the week.
Yeah. That makes it hard. I actually don't see a lot of, I was having a conversation about measurement and, how do you actually measure the impact of what you're doing so you know what's working and what's not working. And in implementation, I don't see a lot of that actually. People implement things and then it's done and they move on. So I definitely think we can do a better job at that.
I think that
yeah.
There are exceptions. I think there are exceptions to this, but broadly speaking, I kind of think that if you, going back to the change point, if you actually change something that that's meaningful, it's reasonable to expect almost immediate feedback. And really, I think that you should be, if it's a sort of strategically meaningful change, then it's reasonable to expect immediate positive feedback. And obviously there's a theoretical scenario where you might get short-term negative, long-term positive. But like if we just exclude that for a second, I think that you should be able to just make fairly low risk, small moves or changes or actions and be able to find out pretty quickly whether it's sort of positive or negative. I would say that would apply to, pulling a number out of my ass, 7 out of 10 of these sort of scenarios. So like on the projects that I work on, you quite often find something that the guys in the business can do almost immediately that will at least give a bit of signal back from the market or whatever it might be. And so if you can find something like that, well, then you might as well do it. And then you can sort of like start to push on with more confidence after that. But whether it's good or bad, it should be kind of obvious, I think, because if nothing really happens, again, I would go back to, well, have you actually changed anything?
And Chris Fox is saying here, which is spot on, the feedback you need is not did we do what we said we would do, but did it achieve the outcome we thought it would achieve? Absolutely, Chris. Yeah. Okay. Just looking through to see if there are any last questions. That I think we've covered most of these. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you all for your comments, which has certainly enriched the discussion. If I can just wrap us up now, I think what I'll do is I'll send round the recording for folks who want it. I'll send the recording through. It'll come through my Turbocharge Weekly, which is my weekly newsletter. So if you aren't receiving it, or if you've unsubscribed, make sure you subscribe to that. I'll just put the link in. Otherwise, you won't get that or invitations to the next one. The next one will be on AI. And so Morik Dippel, who's on the line here, who's CEO of a tool called Circalytics, we are going to be doing a virtual roundtable, a leader roundtable on the topic of AI, using an AI tool and also using the opinion of AI, because as Will was talking about, we can inject the opinion from AI, the expert opinion, and put that into the mix and see what we come up with. So I'll invite you to be part of that very soon. And I think if I can just pull out one quote here, I particularly like the one, "Sex up the strategy to make more progress." That came from Alex. I like Will's t-shirt, and I would very much like to see that on LinkedIn. Everything important is uncertain. And from Rob, it's just that importance of taking into account uncertainty and making sure that we have a mechanism to do that with probabilities. Thank you all very much, our panelists who've been amazing. If you want to turn on your audios and just give them a round of applause, that was just amazing. Thank you, guys.
And Lisa, before people drop off, I see we got 79 still here with us. It would be great if people could pop in the chat, just like, what was your one takeaway?
Please. Thanks, Will, for reminding me.
Yeah, it's always really fascinating to see what resonates from the discussion.
Middle-sized companies usually don't have a strategy. There you go. And the hourglass. Fantastic. See them coming through. There are no straightforward answers. Will's increased demand for transformation office and implementation. Sex up the strategy. Hourglass.
Yeah, bloody hell, Will, who are these like 500 people contacting you every year? Like, I'd be happy to have 5.
Well, 10 years to overnight success.
Yeah, it's one of those, yeah.
If you want your results to change, then you need to change something. That's right, Tamsin. My takeout from Janie, love the quote about everything uncertain is important. That's gold. Will, implementation is key, from Leanne Farnworth. Rupal, get comfortable with uncertainty. Strategies sometimes are more intent and not actual strategy. Joel Reimer, uncertainty is a constant, not a roadblock. Thank you. Chris, great sharing of experiences. Thank you all. Julie, if you want results to change, you need to change something. And so the list goes on. Joe Cutbush, thank you. Implementation is so much more important than strategy itself. There are assumptions about certainty and strategy that just don't hold. Everything important is uncertain, from Robert Will. And Alex, there's so much emphasis on making strategy right, but there's no emphasis on making strategy interesting. It needs style and charisma to make people act. Rob's uncertainty. Sandy Orleo, decrease of importance in functional and industry knowledge. Thank you, Sandy. The idea of experimentation, from Richard Kingston. Martin Gillespie, strategy starts with optimal metabolic health of the individuals involved. Thank you, Martin. Neil Mann, when it comes to strategy, the future isn't something that happens to us. The future is something we do. Very wise. Eileen Pippins, hello, Eileen. Takeaways, implementation looks different and impacted by engagement. Thank you. Tim Kiss, takeaway is that strategy involves discipline and discomfort. Daniel Fogarty, hi Daniel, peel back the layers of uncertainty. David Dibble, the skills that will become more important, selling and motivating strategy implementation. Why did we not talk about pacing? David Dibble, you'll have to expand that one. And just a whole lot of thank yous and lean into the discomfort. Thank you, everyone. I'll summarize those in Turbocharge Weekly in the weeks to come. Thank you all for participating. It's been a great conversation.
Done, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Lisa.
guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.